Today, I want to talk about manipulation tactics of narcissistic mothers. And the main ones I'm going to discuss are gaslighting, triangulation, and flying monkeys, as well as guilt tripping. And these are not the only ones, but these are the ones I'm going to touch on today. And it could be a narcissistic mother or any kind of narcissist who uses these. So the first one is gaslighting. And this comes from a movie from the 1930s, I believe, that was called Gaslight. And this movie is so old that at the time, instead of electricity, they had gas lamps that were, I guess, kerosene powered, but instead of light bulbs. And so it's about a couple, and the husband has the intention of driving his wife crazy, essentially. And I can't remember why, perhaps an insurance scheme. I'm not sure what it is, but he does it by turning down the gas lamps at night. And when she comments on it, he says that they never changed. So this is enough to start driving her crazy. And this is where the term gaslight comes from. So it really means denying someone's reality, telling them what they see, think, or feel is not real or not true. It could also be minimizing your feelings, so telling you that you don't have the right to feel that way, that you are being too sensitive about things, that you should just let things go. It can also be physical in terms of someone perhaps taking your keys, and when you're looking for them, they know where they are, but they're not telling you. So you might have left your keys on the table. They take them and hide them. They know you're looking for them. And then after you've kind of gone a little bit crazy when knowing where you put it, but they're not there now, then they will return the keys when you're not looking and they'll be back on the table and you'll just wonder what is going on with me. You might think you're kind of losing your mind or losing your memory. And this is what leads you to believe that perhaps your narcissistic mother forgot what she said when she denies that what you're bringing up to her that you want to address with her, some behavior of hers that was very erratic, very irrational, not acceptable, very cruel, whatever it was. You're bringing that to her attention, and she is telling you that never happened. I used to think this about my mom that, oh, she must not remember. It was so convincing, this act of hers, that I really believed that she didn't remember. And so that's why it doesn't matter how many receipts you bring to the narcissistic mother, it's never going to get her to admit what she's done. Now, you can keep those receipts for yourself, so you know you're not crazy, but trying to get her to admit to anything based on any amount of evidence that you're bringing her is just not going to work. She's just not going to do that. She can't admit she's wrong. She can't take accountability for everything. She's just not made that way. So it's really futile to try and get her to do this. And I wanted to note about gaslighting that it's not only narcissists who gaslight, anybody can gaslight. It's just a toxic behavior, but it is thought that all narcissists do gaslight. It's one of their favorite ways to manipulate and control people. So there's that one. Then we have triangulation. So triangulation is when the narcissistic mother will bring someone else into the fold in order to create conflict and division. So the prime example of that would be the scapegoat child, golden child, narcissistic mother triangle. And there are three roles in the triangle. So there's the perpetrator, the rescuer, and the victim. And of course, the narcissistic mother is going to decide who plays what role. And the roles could change and move around based on her needs. And so she would tend to see herself as the victim. The scapegoat child would be the perpetrator in her eyes, and the golden child would be her rescuer. And if you're not aware of these dynamics yet, the scapegoat for a narcissistic mother is the child or the sibling who she projects all her perceived negative qualities onto. And then the golden child, in contrast, would be the one that she projects all her perceived positive qualities onto. And what we see happening here is that the mother uses her children as objects to reflect her back to herself. So she can't hold human beings as flawed or more than just all good or all bad. She doesn't really have the capacity to hold that. And so she has to split them into all good or all bad. And if there's one sibling, or not sibling, if it's an only child, it might be that at sometimes she's all good, at other times she's all bad. And so you might notice that in your dynamic. If you were the scapegoat or the bad child, that's why your mother did that. She couldn't see you as many different things. You were just this one thing. Because in her mind, and this is for herself too, and this is why she can't admit to any wrong or any flaws, or she can't take any kind of criticism or anything resembling criticism. It's because she thinks that if she makes a mistake or she has any kind of flaw, then she's all bad, and she can't risk that. So she has to pretend that she's all good. She's always right. She's the most beautiful. I think of the queen in the Snow White story, the fair, who's the fairest of them all. And when it said Snow White, she like had a total meltdown. That sounds like a narcissistic mother. And so that's what's going on in that dynamic. She's using these two children in this case to soothe herself, because there's all this going on inside of her, and all these manipulation tactics are used to soothe herself. And of course, it hinders, to say the least, the relationship between the siblings. And with triangulation, there is not much communication between the other two parties without the narcissist managing that. And so, in another case, it could be, for example, my narcissistic ex tried to triangulate me with his mother. And I hardly ever saw his mother, but he could do it even when she wasn't there, right? So as a daughter, it might be with your mother, someone at her workplace who's your age and who is all the things that you aren't. And you always hear about her and your mother's so close with her. Well, that's not an accident that she's reporting all that back to you. It's because she wants you to feel jealous and she wants you to be fawning and clamoring for her attention to prove to her that you are the best daughter, to prove to her that you're better than this woman at work. That's exactly what she wants. It just plays into everything she's craving, which is for people to kind of crawl on their knees to get her attention, to put her on a pedestal, to admire her, all of that stuff. So that's triangulation. And then we have the flying monkeys. So the flying monkeys also come from an old movie, and you probably know it's The Wizard of Oz. And in The Wizard of Oz, the Wicked Witch of the West, I believe, had flying monkeys who were like her pets, but they worked for her. So she would snap her fingers, send them out, and they would do whatever she wanted. They did her bidding. And one of the big things they did is that she said, "Go get Dorothy," and they would go get Dorothy and bring her back. And so these monkeys, we assume, are very loyal to the witch. They must love her. They must be just so beholden to her, and they'll do whatever she wants. The truth is, when the witch dies, you remember at the end, and this is a spoiler if you haven't seen The Wizard of Oz, at the end, Dorothy throws a bucket of water onto the witch, which is a kryptonite to her. And so she ends up melting and essentially dying. And all the flying monkeys cheer and applaud. And there's even a song they sing called Ding Dong, the Witch is Dead. And so we realize, oh my goodness, they didn't love her at all. They were just afraid of her. And they're so happy that she's not here anymore. And now they're free. So this is what flying monkeys are like to a narcissist. And these are the people that if you go no contact with your mother or you set some sort of boundary with your mother, which if she was like my mother, setting a boundary with mother could get you disowned. It creates a rupture in the communication. You might be getting the silent treatment, and it's not going to get better or go back to the way it was unless you, as the daughter or the adult child or whoever is the narcissist in your life, it's not going to change and get better or go back to the way it was until you do the repair. So you have to suck it up. You have to let it go. Even maybe tell her you're sorry. You have to crawl back. And this is always the way it is. It's the way it was with me anyway. And maybe you've gotten tired of the charade and you finally said, I'm not going to do that. And so you're not in contact with your mother. Well, the flying monkey is going to come in, and this is could be a member of the family, it could be a family friend. You know, for me, it was my mother's sister. And when I was dealing with my narcissistic mother-in-law, it was her husband. So it's just someone who calls you, texts you, comes to visit you, phones you, whatever it is, and basically tries to get you to make things right by giving the narcissist whatever she wants. And there is no concern with how you feel. There is no asking your side of the story. There is just this sense that you got to make this right by pleasing her, appeasing her, abandoning yourself. And if you grow up in a family like this, you might be so used to people expecting you to do that that you don't notice how unjust and outrageous it is that these people are expecting you to drop your boundaries and just do whatever she wants. But that is what's happening. And so the reason they're doing this is because they really want the family system to stay the way it is. They need things to keep moving along, even though they're totally toxic and no one is really happy in this system. They can't risk having to face any change. So they need to bring you back into line by any means necessary. They're going to either guilt you or shame you or make you think that you're breaking your mother's heart, whatever it is to get you to just go back. That's what they're there to do. And these flying monkeys, sometimes they don't have any bad intentions. They're just like people pleasers who want to smooth things over. They might believe your mother's lies about how mean and awful you are to her. It could be that they are afraid of conflict or the change that might happen if you don't come back into line. They're afraid of losing the family and being alone. All these things are at play. But what they don't take into account is how you feel. And that is very negative in the conversations you'll have with them and how they approach you. And that's the thing you want to pay attention to. So with flying monkeys, you want to be careful not to give them any information because they can take that back to your mother. And this can be used against you. It can be used in a smear campaign, or it can just give your mother the satisfaction of, oh yeah, look what I'm causing. Everyone's talking about me and I'm getting all this information from this daughter who's not talking to me. I mean, imagine how thrilling it is for her to be pulling the strings of you and the flying monkey this way. So you might try even telling the flying monkey, well, I'll talk to you, but I'm not going to talk about that topic. You know, I'm not going to talk about my mother and me. Let's talk about something else. And you might find that they're not interested in talking about anything else. They really do just want you to get back into line and get things going the way they always were. So that's flying monkeys. And the last one I'm going to talk about is guilt tripping. And you may not realize that guilt is a manipulation tactic of the narcissistic mother. But it is a big one because you might think that when you set a boundary with her, including no contact, that when you feel guilty, that it's because you've done something wrong. But in fact, that's not true. And there is a lot of mainstream talk out there by people like Brene Brown that guilt is a sign you have done something wrong. Guilt is a sign that you have let yourself down or that you've compromised your values. And that may be true for people who grew up in a healthy home. But if you grew up in a dysfunctional, narcissistic home, guilt is something that's been used against you since you were a little child. So you'll feel guilt really easily. It's a real go-to when you set any kind of boundary. And that's because it's what you're used to. It's your conditioning, your lifelong conditioning by your primary caregiver. Because unlike healthy parents who don't want their children to feel guilt, who will do almost anything to alleviate their children's guilt, narcissistic mothers encourage it. They will stoke that guilt because that makes you easier to manipulate. It makes you easier to control. It makes sure that you will do what she wants. And so they want you to feel guilty. So that's what's going on there. So it's very important to realize that guilt is not a sign that you're supposed to drop your boundary, because a lot of times the guilt we feel is so overwhelming. And that is because as children, we didn't have any support around any of our emotions, especially guilt. And so when guilt or any other emotion comes up, it feels like we can't tolerate it. We can't sit with it. We can't live with ourselves. We can't process it. The feeling of life or death, because when you were a child, if you displeased your mother, that was a matter of life and death because you were totally dependent on her. And regardless of how much time has passed, regardless of the fact that you're an adult now, you still feel that life or death, fight or flight response come up in you that makes this guilt intolerable. So the mistake we make is that instead of tolerating the guilt, we will try to do what we can to alleviate it. And that usually means taking an action that is not honoring to yourself. It usually means calling mother on Mother's Day, even though you've gone no contact for X amount of time, because you can't stand the guilt of being the daughter who doesn't call her mother on Mother's Day. You get rid of the guilt for the very short term, but the longer term consequence is that you're right back in the cycle of abuse with your mother. All that hard work you might have done setting the boundary or going no contact, that's the thing that gets compromised when you give in to the guilt. So instead of doing that, you want to process the guilt or any other emotions that come up. And that can mean sitting with them, but sometimes that is intolerable, that is overwhelming. And so you want to manage your nervous system or regulate your nervous system while you feel these emotions. And the best way to do this, in my opinion, is through EFT tapping. So that's emotional freedom technique or tapping. And this is where we tap through meridians in our body as we talk about how we feel. So basically, you're naming the emotion and why you feel it as you tap through meridians and soothe your nervous system, giving you what you need, that self-care you need to handle the emotion. And what it does is lessens the intensity so that you can manage it. So you might start the tapping session with your guilt at a 10. And as you tap through two, three, or more rounds, and then gauge yourself again, you might find that the guilt has come down to a 5. And when I did this with a client, her guilt came down to a 5 from a 10. And in addition to that, she discovered that she had some anger underneath that she needed to process. So the guilt might also be hiding other feelings like anger, because daughters of narcissistic mothers have a lot of suppressed anger that also needs to be processed. And that's probably for another day. But uh, guilt, we want to feel it just like any other emotions instead of trying to escape it by doing something to please your mother. And then, so looking at all these manipulation tactics, the gaslighting, the triangulation, the flying monkeys, the guilt tripping, what do you do when you're faced with these? How can you empower yourself in the face of the narcissistic mother's tactics? And everything she does is designed to get you to react. And that's why you might feel so triggered when she says something or she does something that drives you crazy. And that even though she's done it a million times before, you're always surprised, you're always blindsided, you're always heartbroken. And that feeling of hope that she would do things differently and then being let down is really your inner child. It's a false hope that the inner child holds on to because she needed to as a child. If as a child you told yourself that my mother's hopeless, she's a terrible mother, she can't parent, I can't trust her, I can't rely on her. Think of how dangerous that is when you're dependent on someone who's hopeless and unreliable and totally untrustworthy. Like it's more scary to believe that than it is to tell yourself a false story that if I'm only more lovable, if I'm only a better daughter, then she will be the good mother I want her to be because you feel like you have some control over that. But the truth is, you don't. It was never about you, it's always about her. And so the most important thing to do is not to react. And that will go against everything in you. It'll go against everything you want to do. And that's because these manipulations, they're really expert con artists, narcissistic mothers or any narcissist. They've been practicing con artistry since they were children or young adults. And so they're experts at it. And if they want to get a reaction out of you, they're very good at doing that. So your job is not to react. Your job is to, even though you know what these tactics are, you don't tell her that you know. Silence is your best friend, or as few words as possible. So instead of confronting her with, I know what you're playing at, I know what you're doing, you want to just know that in your heart and feel that in yourself to validate yourself and just be quiet to her about it. It's actually more empowering to know what she's doing and not tell her than it is to show your cards to a shark, essentially, and play her game. You don't want to play her game. You want to totally withdraw from the game. So, those are just a couple of tips on how to deal with these manipulation tactics. And I hope that was helpful to you today. And if you don't know me, I am a trauma-informed coach who helps daughters of narcissistic mothers and family scapegoats. And I help you overcome the effects of narcissistic abuse so you can have the life that you deserve and desire. Thanks for listening.